Hello and welcome again. This will be our second podcast episode as we continue to discuss the book Empowered Humanity Theory by Jason Littlefield. And pleased to welcome my friends back, Dr. Diana Bloom, a board certified neurologist, and Zander Keg, a licensed critical social worker. I have known Diana and Zander for several years now. What unites us is a love for human dignity, creative expression, and the individual. I mean, it's fair to say that we all shy away from dogmas and slogan words. Our common passion and love for an examined life leads us today to Jason's book, Empowered Humanity Theory. 3 weeks ago, we began our review of Empowered Humanity Theory by sharing our respective backgrounds, our origin stories. I learned Zander had roots in the Los Angeles area and that Diana was a distant cousin of noted writer Boris Pasternak. And we'll have to talk about that at some point, Diana, some other day. We launched a review of part one, A Basis for Empowered Humanity Theory. The basic idea being there is a proposed framework that takes advantage of the brain structure and architecture. If we know there's a ground floor or the reptilian brain, a middle floor, the limbic system, and a top floor, the neocortex, we can then use this knowledge to turn the key of neuroplasticity and rewrite the brain for a higher purpose and away from tribalism and groupthink. Marvelous possibilities here. So today, the three of us are going to dive into part two of this book. Part two is entitled The Essential Attitudes. What are the essential attitudes? Jason suggests they are one, developing a valued-centered identity. Number two, cultivating a dignity lens. And number three, prioritizing a compassionate, inquisitive mindset. Now, those words in number three sounds a little bit clunky to my ear. Perhaps I might have chosen the words curiosity and compassion. It's more pleasing to the ear, but those are quibbles. I think the heart of the point remains compelling and promising, that we always remain compassionate and inquisitive about how we view the world. So number one, what is a value-centered identity? Parker Palmer says our deepest calling is to grow into our authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. One of my favorite thinkers and philosophers summed it up so well. In fact, I used this as a line in my Substack. Socrates said it best: the unexamined life is not worth living. So as we discuss a value-centered identity, let's uncover some core values that define our authentic selves and our actions therein. If I might, let me start with Diana. Diana, I know as a doctor in the area of neurology, many of these concepts are very familiar to you. Can you explain to us and for the audience how an emphasis on core values rewires the brain from, say, tribalism to a healthier transformation? How does that kind of work?
So, I see it as, do you have cognitive dissonance or not? And if you're not acting in a way that's congruent with your innate, set of core values that, you prioritize, you're creating a situation of cognitive dissonance, and then that kind of opens up the floor for mental health problems and
Mm,
being manipulated. And it's certainly not true to one's individual identity. And in today's world, a lot of what's being pushed, especially onto kids, and I emphasize on kids because they have a developing brain. And so the circuitry is still being wired. So what you practice, as I mentioned, last time, neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're constantly practicing group identity, whether it's based on race or gender, whatever you want to label it, you're that's going to be at a expense, right? And the expense is your own individual identity and values. So that's
Mm.
kind of how I see it. But I definitely am curious what the rest of you think.
Okay, well, Sandra, what is your take on that in terms of the advantages of uh, wiring your brain in the direction of values as opposed to groupthink and tribalism?
Well, it aligns really well with just my own life experience, and what I've been able to do, with my own brain, which was wired very differently from my, beginning days, and the work that I had to put in to be able to be a person who could navigate through everyday stressors and strains, and then all of the other things on top of it. I mean, that's what I tell people is, if your goal is to live a life free of stress and conflict and concern, that is not possible. That's not possible. There will always be conflict, there will always be stressors, and there will always be situations that we are uh, don't want, that we're uncomfortable with, that anger us, right? All those, and throw us into the cognitive dissonance. And so the way to deal with that is to strengthen, right, coping skills and decision making skills. And we do that through practice, just like anything else. Practicing the piano, practicing our sport, practicing oration, practicing whatever it is that we want to become better at. We have to practice. And so I tell the people, that's the good news. We actually can learn new skills. We can train ourselves to be more resilient. It's not just a hand we were dealt as children and that's it. That's all we have. We can actually trade in cards and get new ones.
I love that. I love that so much. The idea being that to some degree, it's not what happens to you, but if you live from a value-centered identity, it's how you respond to the outside world, to things that occur to you. Let me give you, Xander and Diana, a real-time example and ask for your thoughts on how I might successfully apply a value-centered identity to this issue. Literally, I would say 30 minutes before we started taping, I received a text message from a family member. This family member has a certain, shall we say, position on the political spectrum, and that's cool. Love my family member. But I also know that certain text messages will have a certain, how shall we put it, orientation, a certain ethos. So anyway, today, as we all know, is a federal holiday. It's Columbus Day. So the text message I got said, and I quote, "Happy Indigenous Day," with exclamation points and smiley faces and icons. And I personally, as a history major and having grown up in Virginia, close to many of the events of the early settler days, I have a certain fondness for Columbus Day. So, how should I have reacted to this text message wishing me happy Indigenous Day if my initial orientation is, well, I kind of like Columbus too? What might be a good way, Xander, for me to respond to that in terms of my values in real time?
Well, for example, if what you really value most is family, and truth, and well, let's just leave it at that. Family and truth, these two things seemingly are in conflict now,
Okay.
right? And so there's so many different directions that you could go, um, because what is more valuable, family or truth?
Mm.
truth, not just meaning the truth of the holiday, but like your truth of what's important to you,
Mhm.
right? That Columbus Day is important, that, you know, recognizing a particular person on a particular day, which was, you know, in the 1800s after a lynching of 11 Italians in Louisiana, right?
Mhm.
There's a
Mhm.
historical context. It's not just like pulling it
Right.
out, oh, this person founded this country. Like that's not where this day started. But most
Uh-huh.
people don't know that. So truth would side with educating, maybe. You know, this is why it's important to me to put the emphasis on Columbus Day. And I recognize, you know, the experience and the history also of indigenous, you know, cultures and peoples in our country. You know, so can they coexist, right? But would that family member and you be able to coexist if you did that, right? In a way that was um, amicable, right? So that you could get along with each other when you're together, maybe at family
Yes.
functions, right? So it's like
Yes.
how to balance truth and family, if those are two values you hold the most high. Um, right. And then we have to figure that out. We have to figure out for ourselves, what am I going to
Mhm.
put the emphasis on? Or is there a way to blend them a little bit? Is there a
Mhm.
sort of a gentle way to you know, for example, I remember when I was in my 20s and people would say to me, Merry Christmas. And at the time, I was a bit antagonistic towards that.
Mhm.
And so I would say back to them something like, oh, thank you. And then I would wish them a happy Yule, or
Sure.
so I would just sort of say thank you. And, you know, so that also, that was my way of dealing with that. Now I just say thank you and Merry Christmas, but you know,
But
it's
interesting.
right, that's part of my evolution. So each person is gonna have to sort out for themselves, you know, what is the most highest value, because you know, as we're going to be talking about, you know, sifting through values and getting closer and closer to what are the most important. So I just brought up those two as a possibility in this particular situation.
And I love that response because in the moment, what you're doing is recognizing there's no one right or wrong value, that the world is far too nuanced and complex for that. And that sometimes you may bring more discontent and needless distance in your world if you respond with your primitive brain. Your thoughts on that, Diana, coming from the world of neurology?
Right. Well, I also think that, depending on the situation in a particular moment, context, your value system may be tweaked a little, right? Like when
Mhm.
I was reading through the book, I'm like, well, for me, gratitude and truth kind of are that's like universal in just about every situation. But then for my third
Right.
value, it depends on, sometimes it's humor, sometimes it's grace, sometimes it's love. Like, just depends on
Mm.
what. So in this, particular, how much do you want to play off you? Like, maybe with curiosity, how do you plan on, celebrating Indigenous, trying to,
Right,
obviously you
right,
don't want to pick a fight, but
right, right.
um, understanding why is it important to
Is Diana frozen?
call it this
Uh-oh,
versus,
she's back.
your battles a
Time
little
travel. Continue, Diana.
bit, like some, right. So yes, I think depending on, has this come up before also? Like, is this a issue that has been a sticking point in the past? So a lot, I think context does matter.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
And it's interesting because you mentioned your own inward search for your own values. I know that in terms of my values, I have many, many values, far more than three, five, or 10. But one of the things I kind of value is and I've grown over this. I really kind of de-emphasize quote unquote politics in my personal life. Like it's rare for me to assert into a family space something which I know is quote unquote political, and that might have different perspectives. Either I'm just not thinking in those terms, or I'm thinking I value harmony and getting along over potential disharmony. And so maybe that's one of the, so that's an interesting question. If you kind of do not value politics in the family square or the family arena, and others do, then there's almost always got that kind of latent conflict, if you think about it. Because there are people who do value politics in the family square and circle. So I think it goes towards Zander's point. You have to kind of reflect upon, well, how, if you have a menu of values to choose from, what do you choose in the moment that makes the most sense? And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I think makes a lot of sense as we look at some of these issues. I
Wayne,
think,
can I add to that really quickly?
please do, please do.
Some of the other context to consider, right? So
Yes.
for the listener to consider this, but we'll use your example. Does this family member know or suspect that you might have this kind of response to what they texted and they do it anyway? And what does that mean?
Yeah,
And
Sandra,
what would
what was
happen
that?
if you did it?
What
What
does
if
that
you beat
matter?
them to it and you sent out a happy Columbus Day? How would they respond? Right. So, what I find really interesting is that
Yes.
there seems to be a particular viewpoint that is thought to be most popular, and people who hold those viewpoints feel at total liberty to just say whatever they want, wherever they are, to, whoever they're with or communicating to. And because this is the right way to think about it. This is the correct interpretation. This is the empathetic. This is the caring. This is the intelligent, right? Whatever it is. And
Right.
so if you respond in any way, literally any way, it's taken as a fight or a push or a challenge. Um, and they know it and they want it,
They want it,
knowingly or
Sandra, you say.
unknowingly, right?
They want it.
I think that there are some people who do really like chaos or challenge or conflict. It gives them something, or else there wouldn't be so much of it in their life. They wouldn't behave in a subtle antagonistic way.
So
Like,
you would
what's
even
intent?
you would even coin that as a value they have, quote unquote.
It, at least subconsciously, right?
That's deep.
Unconsciously.
That's deep. What do you think
Like
about that, Diana?
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep sort of picking and picking and picking and pulling and pulling and pulling
Right.
the string
Right.
of this family member who doesn't get it, isn't understanding, and I'm never going to stop. It's sort of like proselytizing. I'm never going to stop, sharing the good word with this family member.
The good word. Vander
Well,
unplugged. I like it. Diana, what are your thoughts?
well, in, using Jason's value-based approach, then that individual is putting their need for setting the record straight or being right or, over the value of your relationship, right? Of the
Uh-huh.
family, of the,
Right.
so I think I think this comes to the fundamental, like what happens with when two people in a relationship have profoundly different values, right? Like
Mm.
that's ultimately like where we have to peel that onion. And I think on a global scale, if we zoom out, the big thing today is the sanctity of life culture versus a death culture, because like when you really zoom out, that's kind of the big um category. But then when you
Right.
kind of zoom in into individual relationships, s- you know, the different value systems really can either foster conflict or foster harmony. So how do we thread that needle where we can get to, and I think that's what this book is trying to help us do, right? Is which
Yes.
values are compatible to ultimate growth on both sides, and how do we achieve that. And I think
This is,
that's where that dignity lens comes in, right? We
yes.
may have
This,
different values, but if we have you know dignity for one another, then
yeah.
we can work together in figuring that out.
I mean, one of the things, this goes towards Diana's point. One of the things I have noticed is, when you're young and you're in love and you're dating that special person, one is inclined to be on one's best behavior and to smooth over the rocky edges. So when it, for example, comes to race, if one happens to be on one particular end of the political spectrum and one is dating a Black woman or a Black man, one may be disinclined to be 100% full throttle. This is my full encyclopedia of values. But over a marriage, the things you value eventually come to the surface, right? If you are open minded, if you're curious, if you're creative, if you really, really, really love asking questions, if you really despise dogma and slogan, that's going to come out. And so, one of the things I've experienced is that sometimes the spouse may feel it was a switch and bait, that they were dating X, but after 25 or 30 years of marriage, they discover, this is Y, not X. Your values are not what I thought they would be, based upon your dating pattern. But I'm not sure what the answer is to that, because if you are totally yourself with your values, and you know that's going to repel the person you're dating, you may just suck it in. You may just swallow it. You may just go along with the flow, not recognizing that years later, whatever your values are, your authenticity will come to the surface. So I can recognize these issues. One of the things I've asked Zander and Diana to do is to look at page 41 of Jason's book. And he has a wonderful listing of the panoply of values one could have. And I want each of us to kind of pick three of those values and explain why those three most resonate with us. And I'll begin the process. I mean, for me, when I looked at this listing, immediately three things jumped out at me. One, creativity. Love creativity. I live with creativity. I cannot imagine a life without the ability to be creative. I mean, I write Substack essays every day because I love it, because I enjoy bringing different ideas together. Uh, Number two, curiosity. Good God, I love asking questions. I remember when I was in junior high school, I made it a point to ask the most questions every day in every class because I just wanted to enjoy knowledge. That's a value for me. And then number three, truth. You got to have truth. If you don't have truth, what do you have? I get so annoyed when I'm in low trust environments and settings because I don't know who to trust. Truth gives you that glue. And so for me, those are my three core values: creativity, curiosity, and truth. What about you, Diana? What are your three core values from that listing?
So the first two, like I said, it was a no-brainer. So for me, gratitude has helped me get through some really challenging times in my life. And I feel that, you know, when I can focus on, okay, but at least this is going well, at least that, it just gives me a little bit of perspective against the overwhelm that can happen when, chaos and conflict and whatever life has to
Exactly.
offer, right?
Right.
Um, so gratitude helps me ride the waves of life. Truth, I'm a physician, and so it's so important when I counsel patients. I may not have a right or wrong answer, but my
Mm,
responsibility is to present the truth.
mm,
Here's the risks, here's the benefits, and I would say, especially Xander, I think this is where you and I. It's so funny. We come from different backgrounds, but we ended up in the same place.
Right.
But, when it comes to like gender affirming care, like I
Hmm.
wanted to get to the truth. I knew nothing about this. I'm a neurologist, like taking care of Parkinson's patients. What do I?
Right.
But I felt like I wanted to understand because my kids are coming home with questions and their friends and all this stuff. And so truth to me is a huge value. But then the third one, I was really having a hard time picking because I'm like, well, uh, there's at least five others that I think are important
Uh-huh.
depending
Yeah.
on the context, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in humor. I think sometimes like you can break a very tense moment with a joke, and so I do try and
Oh,
use
that's
that
true.
when
Yeah.
appropriate, when appropriate. I believe in grace, like we all mess
Mhm.
up,
Yeah.
and sometimes
Yeah.
I'll tell my patients when you're really having a hard day, just put your hand on your heart and give yourself some
I
grace,
love that. I
you
love
know.
that.
So and then of course hope. I don't think I could be a Jew without hope, right? So, last night we actually had a little gathering to watch all the hostages come home, and
Ah,
the hope in that room with, people who've
yeah.
been suffering for 2 years, some,
Yeah.
just waiting for their life. So yeah, I think it just a little bit depends on the context. So the first two I think are pretty universal for me, and then the third kind of depends
Mm.
on
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
working dealing with.
I love that. I love that. And how about you, Xander? What are your three core values from the listing?
Well, I noticed, when the exercise it says, just select all of the values and then whittle
Hmm.
that down to 10, then five, then three.
And three,
And
right?
so, yeah, I think it was well over 20 that I checked initially. And then I was like, oh gosh, okay, down to 10. Oof, five. Oh no. But I enjoyed the exercise because it's a good reminder, of like what my values compass is.
Hmm.
Because it's easy to forget because I think as Diana was saying, there are times when there might be some fluctuation.
Right.
But maybe it's just maybe one or two, but there's always that due north, right? And what is that due north? And so for me, I selected curiosity.
Mm.
I also love to ask questions. I'm eternally, curious,
Right.
because I'm just fascinated. I'm fascinated by life, by nature, by people,
Mm-hmm.
by concepts. It's all very fascinating to me because at least in the way I view things, like everything's made up. So like
I
how
like that.
how how did this come to be? Like I'm always asking my wife, like, I wonder what the first person who had popcorn like experienced, like, or like how'd they figure out how to make fudge? Like I'm just really curious about things, how'd they name all these birds and why do we have 600 plus beetles on the planet? Like, oh,
Right.
I'm fascinated by it.
Internal
Um,
questions.
which is why, of course, like Wonder is like a second, and not in my top three, but it would be it's in the top five, right? Because
Hmm.
I'm that awe and wonder. I'm quite
Yeah.
childlike, and I talk about that in my book, the 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 childlikeness, not childishness, but childlikeness, that I
Hmm.
possess. Second is family. Family is, um, I'd say, if there was one true north, it would be family for me. And, the funny thing about it is that that's not something that anybody would have ever suspected or predicted about me because
Mm.
I was quite rebellious as a young person. And of course, your family is typically the main target in your childhood. And I was raised by a single father. So I wasn't being raised in a nuclear family. So sometimes people have trouble with the concept of family or wanting to be part of a family or believing in the family as a result. I didn't, I probably had that when I was younger, but I've, I just grew up to really value family. And My parents are both gone now. My wife's father is gone. Her mother's still around, her sister and her family. And, we moved from California to Florida to be near her family. And now we've moved to Oregon from Florida to stay
Mhm.
near her family because they're coming here or are already here. So,
Yeah.
family, and people are like, you're crazy. Why would you just pick up and leave and then pick up and leave again? And it's like, oh, family's not a value for you, right? Like, and that's
That's,
okay.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay. And then the third is grace. Grace for me is something that was also one of those hard to come by, hard to let in for me because I associated it for most of my life with religion. And
Mm.
I had some unfortunate experiences with religious people in my first 20 years of life, I'd say. But the way I view grace now is that there were people in my early life who saw through my obstinance and my incorrigibility and my outrageousness, my dishonesty, and they stayed with me. They sat with me. They talked with me. They provided me with an outlet. Instead of punishing me, they would redirect me
Mm.
into some other activity or other mindset. And I've never forgotten that. And so part of pulling grace in for me, sometimes people use grace synonymous with like patience or compassion. And I think that's fine. Um, I settled on grace because for me it's more about it aligns a little bit for me with forgiveness. Like it's not something we do for other people, it's something we do for ourselves.
Exactly.
And so that's why I settled on grace rather than something like compassion or empathy, right? Because those are on the list as well, and they have checks next to them, just not as many.
Yeah.
And so I want to be that person for other people. I want to be the person that sits with people in distress and doesn't dismiss them or punish them. Um,
Wow.
that's what I want to be doing more of.
And I think that value of grace is a wonderful segue into the next part of our discussion, namely cultivating a dignity lens, human dignity. What does it mean to be seen for who one is truly? So, for example, if you wish to be seen for who you really are, then others should receive the same presumption, I believe, as well. And that's kind of a definition of extending human dignity towards others. I mean, as I see it, it's about trying to understand people you come into contact with versus manipulating them. That what
Mm,
matters is how you perceive others as people, as a person. You treat them as humans. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guest said, what really annoys people is not necessarily that life is unfair, but it's that people aren't treated as humans. You dehumanize people and you ensure resentment, alienation, disaffection. And so I wanted to kind of talk about human dignity with the two of you. I think that the premise is that human dignity means there's a wholeness in the human condition, that we're more than just ourselves. Um, so, for example, my origin story, as I discussed in our previous conversation, is very much grounded in human dignity. As the only Black kid in my Southern suburban classrooms, by definition, I had to engage the larger world. I had to show people around me who were not of my race or group dignity, respect. I had to learn who they were as individuals. Caricatures and stereotypes would have gotten me nowhere in my classroom. And I think I was blessed in a way because I was so situated that I was steered to see the commonality in others in the human condition. And that's the foundation of human dignity. So, Diana, I want to ask you a question about human dignity, which to me encompasses connection. Um, in your life story, can you recall a moment or a time when your brain was rewired for connection over division, and you could sense that, you recall that example? Do you recall a time in your life where you can remember your brain being rewired for connection over obvious or apparent division?
Gosh, particular situation for me, if I could just take one step back, when I think of
Sure.
where does the encroachment on human dignity begin, is when we start othering someone, right?
Yes.
When you start dehumanizing, like by labeling, right? And so when for me, um we're not monoliths, as are you as a black man, me
Sure.
as a Jew, right? And so the when the pandemic hit and I started kind of realizing, wow, we actually do have an anti-Semitism problem. I
Mm,
mentioned it to a couple of my um non-Jewish friends, and there was a very clear, um it was beyond just a not understanding of what am I talking about. It was, there was a dismissal, and so
interesting.
that dismissal, um to me, that was stripping away my dignity, because if
Mhm.
I'm feeling something, before even being able to even express kind of where that's coming from, or what the
Right.
experience was, that dismissal, um, and sometimes it came even from my fellow Jew, like as if I'm not allowed to um, feel a certain way, or
And you were
so.
expecting connection in that instance,
In
correct?
that moment,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's how and I'm still struggling on the rewiring, because some of those relationships haven't been repaired yet.
Mm,
So um yeah, I'm this is something I on a daily basis try and figure out, well, how do I bridge, because I do believe in forgiveness, and for my own self I
mhm.
forgive, but that doesn't mean I'm going to have a relationship if I still feel like my human dignity is
Right.
being,
Right. Exactly.
dismissed.
Yep.
So that's that, how do you thread that needle? Because I still have respect for the human, even though it pains me to have experienced that
Hmm.
dehumanization myself,
Hmm.
if I'm making any sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Maybe Xander can come up to the plate and offer an example where he could sense or feel rewiring for connection over division, or perhaps he can't think of an example at the current moment.
Well, the thing that came to mind first, so I'll just share it, is this idea of people knowing who we really are. My first sort of pushback on that is, do we really know who we are?
That's
Like
true.
when do we get to the place where we really know who we are? So that's where grace can come in, because I feel like it's a lifelong pursuit to come to the understanding of who we are. And I think it's just through life experiences that we learn that. So that just that, it's not really a rejection of, but it's like when you said it, I was like, oh, shoot. Well, I mean, do I really know exactly, am I going to be the same me 10 years from now?
Oh, that's
But
a
when
good
I think
point.
about, yeah, when I think about a specific, right, because then we're asking people to come along with us. And so that's,
Yeah,
that's extra on top of it.
yeah,
But when I think of a
yeah.
specific, it's not a specific, instance, but it's a reoccurring instance. When I was first starting my transition, right, taking the hormones, and all the changes that were happening with that, I had in my mind, and I should have known better because my father always told me that you're disappointed when you have expectations, but I did have a certain set of expectations based on my life experience up to that point. I mean, I was, 39 years old, and that was that certain people in my life were going to be accepting of what I was doing. And, they'd take their process, but they wouldn't reject me outright. And then I suspected that there were other people who were in my life, maybe a little bit more on the margins, but, and then out in society would not accept it. And I might, have some challenges that I'll have to deal with. And the biggest learning for me was that some of those people that I thought were going to be the most accepting turned out to be the least accepting. And the people that I thought would be the least accepting have turned out to be the most accepting. And so now I do a lot of mentorship within FTM, or, like trans men community. And that's one of the things I usually bring up when they start talking about disclosing to people is, hold in your mind the possibility that you're going to tell people and have an expectation and you might be wrong. And
Mm.
how are you going to manage that? Right? Let talk it through. Let's role play. That was a big learning for me, a really big learning. And it's something that continues to this day. It's not like just something that happened, right? I'm 20 years into this process now. I'm 59, and I still encounter these cross,
Yeah.
responses. But now I don't expect them to be any way. I hold open. That curiosity helps me there.
It's interesting, and I'll just briefly mention this before moving on to the third part of our discussion. You mentioned the expectations of how one will be treated or received. Um, in my own family, I won't mention names, of course, but in my own family, I've seen that manifested in sexual orientation. So I have a cousin my age. She never married. Um, she always had a friend, a female friend. And it took my daughter to open up my eyes to suggest maybe cousin was lesbian, but because of her age, my age, and because of where she lives, Richmond, Virginia, that would not have been accepted to be lesbian. Or she may have assumed people would not. So she just kept those things to herself. Contrast her to another family member who is also lesbian and never thought twice about it, never considered the fact that there would be any issue. And I think it's a generational thing because that person is in their 20s. And then that person has cousins who are lesbian, but they dare not speak its name to their parents because they don't know how their parents will receive that expectation. So to me, that's fascinating. I'm a curious man, how you can have these different relatives of different generations presume different expectations because of their orientation sexually. And even within the same generation, you can have cousins that have different mindsets. To me, this is fascinating. I don't know where to
Mhm.
go with that. I thought I would mention that because I stand from afar and look at that and just think that's interesting. Diana?
Well, what was when you're telling me this story, I'm like, so this person values truth over family, and this person values family over truth, right? Like
Oh, yes, yes,
in
yes.
terms of what
Right.
what is going behind the being
Right.
open,
Right.
and coming out and versus
Yes.
not.
Yes.
Um,
Or
so I remember
authenticity,
when
which is on the list, right? Authenticity.
exactly. And
Hmm.
I think it comes with both lived experience and societal norms and all that, because like I remember when we came to America, um, you would think my grandparents would be like, now we're free, wear your Jewish star proudly. No, 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 hide. Like you don't want to rock the boat now that we're here. We just want to, right?
Oh, that's
Like that was my
interesting.
grandma.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whereas for me, and actually my parents were like, you got it. Like,
Right.
be, in terms of the
Yeah.
Jewishness. So I think a lot of it is also just our, our backgrounds, our experience, our fears. I think fear actually is a huge, and when you think about the brain and, what exactly drives behavior, it's I think fear is a huge one. So how am I
I-
going to be perceived and all
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
It makes me sad in a way because it is the year 2025. And I feel sadness at two levels. Level one, here is a cousin who in her 60s and will never be able to just be truthful about that side of her life. And there are people in their 20s who have the same feelings about their relations with their parents. That kind of saddens me. And I feel joy for the other cousin who just she just is who she is. And I think she has she's more blessed, I think, in terms of her authenticity.
Hmm.
That's what I think. I could be wrong. So
I think that there are people who don't disclose publicly about their sexual orientation, but they're also not hiding it, right? It's not as
mm,
if this cousin got married to a man and had children and is hiding,
yes,
right?
yes.
So there's in my family, we were referred to as the ones who won't marry because marriage wasn't an option back in the day. They didn't call us gay or lesbian. In my line of cousins, I'm the only one, but in my second line, right, my second cousins. There's a whole bunch of gay and lesbian cousins, and we were all very different about how we were around the family. Um, and and what we did, like I was an activist outside of my family, but within my family I was very keep the peace. I was very don't make a big deal out of this because there doesn't need to be a big deal made out of it, and my family had no problem with it, because I was the one who was bringing the friend around for
Yes,
years and years and years,
the
right?
friend,
Yeah, so
same
you know
face, different year.
you know Yeah. I had an uncle, second uncle, of course, who had a roommate for like what, 36 years or something, so
Yeah, that's how that works. This
yeah.
is a wonderful bridge to our final discussion, which would
Hmm.
be that of the compassionate inquisitive mindset, or as I would have put it, curiosity plus compassion. So for me, as we already have discussed, curiosity is where it's at. That's the abundance of a wonderful, joyful, rich life. However, I have found sometimes when I'm just curious, living my value, it's not well received. When I'm thinking of this particular moment, I was in a book club and the guy was a fellow Harvard Law graduate. And we were discussing a book about Reconstruction. And after the book club meeting was over, he sent out an email to everyone. And it was clear from the email that, of course, everyone supports reparations for American slavery. Well, I don't. I'm very vocal about that. So I sent him just like a little one or two line response. Just so you know, I don't support reparations for American slavery. I think I talked about this before on another podcast. He just exploded. He just sent me like this 3-page tome in response to my little one or two. That's ridiculous, Zander and Diana. And at some point, he was actually the first person in my life I have ever blocked because he was like a
Mm.
Klingon. He was just like an alien in outer space. He just could not accept the idea that I had a different opinion. And I wanted to ask questions about this. What are your
Okay.
thoughts about that? If if curiosity is part of a good mindset under the theory, empowered humanity theory, doesn't it require that the recipient, the listener, also be open-minded? Because otherwise you risk my experience with the book club guy and reparations for American slavery, where your questions are met with there's a word for it. Not what's the word for it? When someone's not emotionally regulated. Let's put it that way. When they just respond out of all proportion. What are your thoughts on that? First, Diana, and then Zander.
Well, they're reactive, right?
Yes.
Your
Yes.
curiosity is received as a threat. And
Okay.
so it's triggering their fear circuit. They're flipping their lid, their
Yes. Thank you.
prefrontal lobe is
Thank you very
gone,
much. Yeah.
and they are just in a reactive mode because they somehow, by you being curious, they're
Yes.
being threatened. And so that's really
Which I
the
don't get, by the way, but continue.
well, no,
But
but
why don't go
that's
ahead.
where I think we are an impasse in society. I think
Mm,
this is where I'm trying to peel the onion and say, how could my curiosity threaten you?
right.
Like
Right.
that's what
Exactly.
I'm trying, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and personally, I think it's because the way that kids are being wired. And when I say like, if it is a little bit of a generational thing, although it sounds like
Okay.
this guy is
Yeah.
your counter.
Definitely. Right. 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 Right.
But when you look at the world in these binaries, right,
Yeah.
oppressor, oppressed, good, then there's very little room for curiosity, and so then anything becomes a potential threat, and
Mhm.
so that's where I love nuance. I love
Yes. Yes.
tell me more. Like this is where you're coming from. Tell me more. I want to learn more. So
Yes.
so
Yes.
that it's de-escalating the threats, right? Like I'm
Yes.
not and sometimes the best is with a question as opposed with a statement, right? Oh, I maybe I'm
Mm,
misunderstanding. Can you, like I said,
hmm
tell me
hmm
more is my favorite phrase. Like
Sure.
because
Sure.
sometimes patients or people
Patience.
start start telling you, and then they are forced to think about their argument when
Yeah.
you know what I mean,
Right.
and then hopefully between the dialogue you get to the truth, but
What do
that's
you think,
it.
Sander?
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Jason calls this, part of this prioritizing mindsets of inquiry and compassion. He talks about moving beyond primal tendencies. And these
Mm,
primal tendencies are our pre-wired into that part of our brain for staying close to the tribe, right?
mhm,
And so if you're curious, then you're maybe going to do something stupid or dangerous or risky. Unknown consequences, results. If you walk away from the tribe to go see what's over that mountain or on the other side of that river, then you risk what? Death.
mhm,
You risk getting lost,
mhm.
which then has an impact on anybody else who's reliant on you, which could be the whole group, depending on how, large or small it is and what role you play in that. And so that it's like, even though we're so far away from that reality, our brain is still very conscious of that. And so when you're with your group of colleagues or people that are part of your group, whatever that might be, and you're the one person who goes, well, I think a little differently about that.
Right.
You have just walked away from the tribe and you're scouting alone, and it's dangerous perhaps. And part of the issue is this is similar with worry. When we think about like parents who are worrying about their kids, it's usually not about what could happen to them. It's more about their own ability to manage whatever does happen to them,
Okay.
Mm.
right? It's am I worried that they're not home yet, or am I worried that I might have to deal with they've been to the hospital
Right.
or
Right.
something's happened to them and I'm gonna have to, how am I gonna, their heart starts racing, their mind starts, right, everything. So it's more that, right? It's like we're not afraid of heights, we're afraid of falling from heights. So I see it as like it's perfectly natural, which is why we have to practice tools and strategies to recognize that our sympathetic nervous system has done exactly what it's supposed to do, which is take charge. And we need to bring a sense of like, wait, so our parasympathetic can kick back in and calm us back down. But it can take an instant to do that. But for most people, it could last days, weeks, months, or years. They're just trapped in that chronic stress of that sympathetic nervous system running amok, and their pancreas and the adrenaline that's shooting and all the cortisol that, and they're gaining weight. It's like a whole trap, you know.
Well, let me say this has been a delightful, rich, wonderful, wide-ranging conversation about part two of Jason's book. And I think for our listeners, you've really had a chance to see it all. You've seen the abstract and you've seen the concrete examples of what it means to be concerned about values, about human dignity, and about the perhaps the outer limits of curiosity in a world of a primitive brain. I'm going to give each of our folks, Diana and Zander, maybe 30 seconds just to kind of wrap it up and offer your conclusions about today's discussion. First, Diana.
So, I actually spent the weekend rereading the just to remind myself, and I found so much more value in repeating some of these exercises. So I did it the first time I read it, but then actually so much has happened in the last, 6 months since I read it the first time that I actually found it therapeutic. Like I'm sitting
Mm,
here in a much more um, calm and where with my prefrontal cortex
right,
fully engaged because I
right.
took the time to really reflect on the practices that his book suggests that we do. So I'm very inspired and hopeful, and this conversation just solidified that for me.
Thank you, Diana. And Zander.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just an honor to have been invited to be part of this discussion, right? Over the course of the discussions we're going to be having. So just I'll put that out there right at the top. Um, I love reading books like this, and because I appreciate the reinforcement, right? It's easy to, it's like a language or an instrument. If you don't keep it up, you lose it, the ability. And I think coping skills are similar to that, right? We need to practice, 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 and do it when we're not in high stress times. And one way to do that is through this reinforcement of doing exercises. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to do that. And I'm so glad that this is what Jason did rather than get angry and start lambasting everybody across social media. This is what he decided to do instead, is he's demonstrating how to put these principles into action by creating this tool for people.
Mm,
Wow. Well,
exactly.
thank you very much for that, Xander, and also for your statement as well, Diana. Um, all I can say is this has been an invaluable conversation. I think we're all blessed to have the brain of Jason at work in producing this framework. Uh, and if the world would adopt this framework, I think indeed we could make the world a better place. And with that note and that sign off, I wish everyone well. Have a great week. And until we meet again. Bye.
Bye.